I was an electronics geek, and even before I went to college, I just studied and studied. I found electronics fascinating, and I was programming early on. And I'm really curious about things. I love to learn. And by the way, I think the best entrepreneurs are people who want to learn from their people.
It starts with just taking that leap.
Man, you have to work hard. You have to be incredibly smart.
Choose something that even if it fails, you are going to be proud of it.
Doesn't matter how badly you got beaten down.
Be kind, be kind, be kind.
Become a better person, a better leader, the better business.
Go with your gut.
I'm Samuel Donner, and this is Finding Founders.
Can you state your full name and 2 or 3 sentences about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Kevin Surace, and I'm a keynote speaker, CEO, CTO, Inventor, have some 94 worldwide patents, some more on the way. Best known as the father of the virtual assistant. I've had a lot of successes. I've had my share of failures as well, but you got to keep getting out there and trying, right?
Yeah, and you definitely have been trying consistently since you got into the workforce. It feels like every transition there was this, I don't know, like something massive that came out of it, whether it be a patent or whether it be like exiting a crazy company. There's a lot of accomplishments. I think something that I want to focus on throughout this interview is like, how do you keep being so relevant? A lot of people would be lucky enough to just have one of the accomplishments that you've had in a career, yet you seem to be able to hit these consistently. And so talking about what that looks like. But to start, I want to talk about your dad and a little bit about what he did with audio electronics.
Yeah, there you go. Good research. So my dad worked for General Electric, the big company, right, at the time. And you're talking about in the 60s and 70s and 80s. At that time, most of this audience won't remember, but at that time, the number one brand in the United States for audio electronics, and audio electronics was actually in a huge industry at the time. And it's things that we don't even think about anymore. It's clock radios and tape recorders and radios and portable radios and those kinds of things, and stereos. This was a big business, a multi-billion-dollar business. And my dad was at GE in that department called the Audio Electronics Products Department. And what was great about that is all of the early things that they were working on often would come home and I'd get to try them and I'd get to tinker with them and I'd get to write something up about them and say, look, here's what I liked, here's what I didn't like. And once in a while, they actually took my advice. They took my suggestions because I was an electronics geek and there was such a thing at the time. And even before I went to college, I just studied and studied. I found electronics fascinating, the whole electronics industry and software. And I was programming early on before high school.
Programming, writing tech reviews that were actually
yes, I was.
The light of day at these companies. That's crazy.
In fact, they were working on a long, which won't mean anything today, but you'll see what I mean, a long distance AM radio. Long distance meaning that it could pick up signals that bounce off the atmosphere at certain times of the night and early into the morning. And so if you were in upstate New York, you'd literally be able to listen to KFI in Los Angeles early in the morning. And you go, long before the internet. Today I can just tune it in. Yeah. But before there's an internet, I actually have to get it off the air. So they were working on a long distance AM radio, and I had an early sample of it. And there was a big feature missing, which was connection to an external antenna. Because if I could get an external antenna and put it up on the roof of the house, I could double or triple my polling capability, my sensitivity, basically. And sure enough, they added it. Like, I wrote this long thing. They added it a few weeks later, and the model that came to market had the external antenna connector on it. So I guess I was being a product manager very early. I was 12 or something, but I was so into these products more than the people who were designing them. They designed it for a market.
You found that use case or found that need for the product that all these other people that were extremely senior had been probably working in the industry for decades. Like, how did you find that? And what they missed, basically. How did you find what they missed?
Great question. Two reasons. One, I was into DXing myself. DXing was long distance AM radio or FM radio. And so I was into the field and into all of the different radios and how to build these radios and how to make them more sensitive, right? How do I put more stages of amplification? How do I be careful that I don't overload one of those stages with a strong signal? How do I put larger antennas in there? And GE themselves had invented the idea of a long distance AM radio back in the 50s, and it had an external antenna connector on it. And then that art had been lost for, call it 2 decades, right? Nobody had touched that. And then the product people said, hey, maybe there's a business in this long distance space. So they developed this radio, but none of them were DXers. None of them were actually using the product in that way. They had just done market surveys and thought, well, people do want to get stations from further away and pick up weak stations. And so they weren't really users of the product. And many of us aren't. When we, in a startup or in any environment, often we're designing a product that we would use, but often we're also designing something that isn't really for us. If it's B2B, it may be something that is very valuable to a packaging business. But I'm not a packaging person myself. I won't actually use it. So you're out listening to customers. So I was an actual user, so I had something valuable to say, and they took it and ran with it, which is really fun. And I think the other reason is, real quickly, is a curiosity. I'm really curious about things, right? I love to learn. And by the way, I think the best entrepreneurs are people who want to learn from their people, from other people, from their customers, right? If you're not curious, you end up building the product that is in your mind, but it's only in your mind. And now you have potentially a solution looking for a problem, right? So if you're curious, you go, what have other people done? Why have they done it? What can I read about? And a lot of my career has been built on curiosity. So I think those are the answers to that, but great question.
Yeah, it seems like that 12-year-old instinct was, I have a passion, let me have an ear to what I would really want, and then probably other people would really want that. And I feel like that is like probably like the first few companies that people usually start is sparked, or successful companies is sparked by an intrinsic curiosity and passion that they explore, and that extends to other people. It's cool that you have that so early. But your other interest was also like in a completely different world of musical theater. I'm curious how that kind of progressed alongside engineering.
So I'm a kid, and I decide I want to play drums. I was 5 years old, and I started taking lessons from 5 onward. My parents found a teacher who would teach a 5-year-old drums. And so I wanted to be a drummer. I wanted to be a percussionist. And of course, that led to interest in a lot, interest in rock, interest in jazz, interest in classical, interest in musical theater. And these are all a variety of genres that a trained musician would look at all those genres and say, what's interesting here? What can I do? How can I participate? And obviously I played in bands, I played in wedding bands, I played in rock bands, but musical theater was amazing because it was this experience that you could go in, and whether it's Sound of Music or Hamilton now, right? You could go in and walk out with this amazing experience that you've experienced 50 people on stage and acting and dancing and singing in a band and etc. So I love musical theater from the first time I saw musical theater, which I think was my actual drum teacher, who was in high school at the time, was Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady. And so that I think that's the first thing I ever saw, and I was 7 or something like that, right? And I go, this is great. I want to do that. I want to sing. I'm not a good dancer, as it turns out. I should never dance. Kevins don't dance. I have sung my whole life, and I've had a singing coach much of my life, and I'm a drummer. And so, of course, I really wanted to go into musical theater. Like what I wanted to do is be a musician or be an actor and go to school for that. My dad, wise as he was, said, that's interesting, but no, it's not one of your choices. There's a lot of choices you have in life. And a lot of parents now do raise their kids with choice theory and all of that. And it's up to the kid, and they can make their own decision. That wasn't a decision I got to make. And if you were going to go to school, it turns out you're really into electronics. Probably that's going to be a good career. Just go and do engineering. And for me, that was software and hardware.
How did you feel about that in the moment? Because it feels like maybe musical theater was the dream, and engineering was something you were good at, but not necessarily like the same fervor for what that life could be like as initially musical theater was for you.
Well, here's the thing. Even then, it wasn't a secret that if you went into musical theater or music, right, it wasn't a secret that there was a good chance you wouldn't do well. And I don't mean you're not doing well on stage, but financially, you're not going to do well.
It's a hard life, yeah.
Most people never really work. The majority of people who go into that field don't really work in the field. Maybe they're a teacher, but they don't work in the field. They end up, unfortunately, waiting tables. And that's just because there are so many people better than you. Now, in your local high school, maybe there aren't. But you stand in that line on Broadway, and you're one of 400 people for this one part, and you go, what am I, crazy? And the same is true if I wanted to play in an orchestra, right? There's only X number of orchestras active in the country, like 40 right now. And if that's what I wanted to do, I am hoping that a percussion job comes up, and because someone died. And when it does, I have to go in and play against, who knows, 100 other people, and hopefully I get something right.
And was that is that like your internal monologue, or was that also what your dad was saying?
No, my internal monologue. My dad didn't really know. He fundamentally knew that ultimately someday you're going to grow up and you're going to want to provide for your family.
Yeah.
Right. And so, look, you have this skill in engineering. Don't waste it. But the other thing he said is you can always do all the music you want and musical theater that you want. You just do it on the side. That'll be your hobby. And by the way, if you want to go make money doing, that's fine too. But you should go to school for this. It'll serve you well. He was right. And unlike a lot of people today, including my own kids, the last person you want to listen to is your parents. But this was an earlier time, and you did have a different respect, I think, for parents, and go, wow, they're smart people, not because they're fundamentally higher IQ than me, but they just have more experience than me. And so I should probably listen to this. So I wasn't like sad or anything. I go, that's probably good advice. I'm going to do that. And I love technology. I'm a technologist. I love technology, but I certainly, and I'm very active in Broadway and musicals. I ran a theater as the artistic director. So I have a lot of experience doing that as well as inventing over here. And a couple of times I've gotten to put the two together. And we can talk about that later and how they came together and how we said, let's break some boundaries here.
But going back to college, so your dad's, hey, here's my advice. Maybe stick to engineering. And you had enough of a curiosity and love of that it didn't seem like that much of a sacrifice, or you're putting your life on hold or anything. It was like, I'm pretty excited about this too. Let's see what this life is like.
I got to perform in college. I was playing drums. I was in the jazz band, and I got to sing, and I got to record. I got to do all that musical stuff in college, but my degree was engineering.
And it seems like that's what your dad also mentions. Like you don't have to not do like music. You don't have to not do performing. It's just have it be on the side thing, and then let's focus on engineering. So what was engineering school like? Was it what you expected? Was it like hands-on in the way that you might have been when you were a kid?
So I chose to go to Rochester Institute of Technology. And RIT is an applied engineering school. What that means is, so when you choose a variety of fields in engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, computer engineering, whatever, you could choose a school that is more theoretical. This is the best way I can say it, where you're getting a lot of theory, you're doing a little hands-on, but it's a lot of bookwork. Or you can do a more applied kind of thing. So I chose to go to a highly applied school. And that meant that you had co-op or internships. You had to go work. It was 5 years to get the degree, not 4, because you had 3 or 4 semesters, really, or quarters of working. And everything was hands-on. If you did it theoretically, then you went into the lab and you did it for real. And you did it. So you designed the circuit, and then you go build the circuit, right? You would design some code on paper, and then you'd go literally code the computer, the VAX at the time, where you'd go code the VAX and make sure it came out and that the program ran the way you thought. So you had to literally do everything. I love RIT, 21,000 students, give or take now. And I'm on the board of RIT, so I'm a big supporter. But that was great. For me, I wanted the hands-on. I did not want some theoretical thing in the sky.
I think also the theoretical thing in the sky is like so much more boring. Like I went to UCLA, did mechanical engineering, and it was all theory. And I had my friends that were at like San Luis Obispo, which is a more applied engineering. Yeah, their first year they build an engine, and end of my third year, I get to build a small miniature chair in the machine shop. I think engineering is most fun when you actually see like what you're engineering and what you can create. It seems like you got to do that pretty early.
Absolutely. Yeah. Our mechanical engineers at RIT, and it's a great program at RIT. They're building cars. They're building entire race cars. They're like, everyone has to go build things. You can't just do it. You do it on paper first. You learn how to do that. You do the CAD drawings, etc. And in our day, we literally did it with pencil, big piece of paper. And then you go build it. Here's the parts. Go machine it, clean it up, put it together. How are you going to fasten it? How are you going to weld it? Whatever the case is, right? Fascinating. So I think hands-on, and including electronics, right? We had to build those circuits, breadboards. And
What
then we
did
had
you
codes.
learn that you liked when you were building this stuff? Because I feel like when you go to university, not only are like you have other students that you can work with, but you also have the university's facilities, maybe some things that you've never had access to before. At least for me, you have the machine shop, you have 3D printing centers. I don't know what it was like at RIT, but I'm curious, like what that like kind of blue sky of opportunity looked like for you, and what were the things that you found that you were interested in as you were able to explore this love of technology?
First of all, I went from like this is wrong to say, but you'll get it. In high school, I had a class of 770 or so kids, right? I was like that crazy genius in the corner in high school, great high school, Camillus, New York, but it's like, he's over programming that thing. In fact, we had a Wang. There weren't PCs yet, right? They were just coming about. So we had this big Wang computer from Wang, W-A-N-G. And everyone, it was punch cards. It was punch card reader only, except one person technically could work on the terminal, but everybody else, you did punch cards. So of course I did the punch cards, but I was the only person allowed to actually code right on the terminal. I could just go up to the terminal. I could stay late and just code. And then they bought me a TRS-80 at high school because I was using up all the compute power that they had. So then I had a TRS-80, a Tandy Radio Shack at the time.
Wow.
Which was the very first, one of the first personal computers anyone could have. And I was writing games. I was writing real programs. I was doing databases. Like I was doing stuff and people are going, he's a nut, right? I don't even know what he's doing. And the horses race across the screen. Go, how is he making horses race across the screen? And you're betting on them and see who wins, right? And I'm I don't know, 15, something like that. So I went from like top of game in my high school and I get to RIT and I go, oh, good God, they're all smarter than I am. Like I thought I was smart and they're all smarter than I am. And in some of the classes, they're crushing me, right? and so I learned that I was better at some things. I was less better at others. Coding, I could crush it. And it's interesting. So I was in a electrical engineering program, and it's electronics, right? That of course included a lot of coding because that's what you did. Coding was up and coming, and we all coded in a variety of languages. Pascal being the newest language of the day at that time. And what was interesting is some of the kids who were so good at circuit design couldn't code at all. And so I'm in the computer lab, and you had to be in the computer lab at the time. And they'd come up to me and say, I have no idea how to write a random number generator. Can you help me with this assignment? I said, yeah, it's 3 lines. Here it is. So I was really good at that. And then I would need help from them on some circuit design where I go, I'm stuck here. I just don't know how to get the voltage right at this point. Okay, use this transistor instead of this or whatever it is. So of course you help each other. And I did graduate with high honors. So it did work out, but it was really, some of the classes were ridiculously hard. And I was going to every class. In those days you had to, there's no online. And I do office hours with most of the professors. 2 reasons. One, because I was really stuck on something I needed help. Second reason was if they got to know me, the truth is there's a certain variability in grades. There's grades on tests, but there's grades on homework, there's grades on how hard they worked and attention in class, and sort of all these things go into it. And so I knew if they got to know me, they'd find that an interesting relationship, and I'd probably do a little better than someone that sat in the back that they had no idea who they were. And that actually does work out, and it works out in life, and it's a good lesson. So I don't feel bad about it.
So it seems like you learn like collaboration skills, you learn how to succeed, even though things were like really tough, as engineering school often is. But were you also thinking about, as you went through school, like what you wanted to do with this degree, what you wanted to do when you went out of school? Did you have an idea of what kind of engineering you wanted to do ultimately?
I didn't really have an idea, but here's what I did. Because my computing skills were good, I wrote a mail merge program, which these things didn't exist at the time, right? That would automatically write a cover letter and modify that cover letter and print the names and addresses on envelopes of people who might hire me. And there was a big book at the time. So I took in the information. I had to put it in there were no spreadsheets, right? So I had to put it in essence, a database that I wrote. And then it went and plugged it. And so I sent out, I think it was 212 letters to potential employers, right? So my roommate comes in and sees all these things, and they're all printed in the computer lab, which you're really not supposed to, right? I'm using up all the resources, but nobody pays attention because I'm usually the only guy in there, especially late at night, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm in there and no one else is around. So I automate the entire resume and cover letter process and envelope process. And all I got to do is put stamps on them. Okay.
Wow.
Pretty good. Okay. Super easy today. Like I don't have to do any coding at all. I had to code that then. I had to write it. I had to write a program to do this.
Yeah.
So I write a program to do this. I use it. It does the whole thing. My roommate comes in and says, what are you doing? I said, I'm sending out my CV and my background and cover letters, and I'm hopeful one of these people might hire me. I said, what are you doing? It's already fall of our senior year, right? Or late fall of our senior year. These need to go out pretty quickly, December or January. I said, what are you doing to look for a job? And he says, I sent out a letter to the one place I really want to work. I said, that's a good idea. I think sending out 212 is a better idea because just statistically, it's going to work out. I ended up getting 12 job offers.
Wow.
Out of all of that. And so I had the most job offers at that time of anyone who had ever graduated RIT. It was they're scratching their head. How'd you do this, Kevin? So I sent out over 200 letters. Just statistically, an idiot's going to get 12 offers, right? I don't have to be the smartest one. I just have to be smart at sending them out. Again, you couldn't do this on the internet in those days. You couldn't automate anything. So we were sending snail mail. So I just used the technology at hand to my benefit. I had 12 offers. And
Did you pit them against each other and try to get like your best comp package?
I did. And the comp package I got at the time was the highest salary coming out of RIT for a bachelor's.
Wow.
Ever.
Wow.
At that moment in time. This is 1985, right?
But I'm sure adjusted for inflation, like
adjusted for inflation was a big number. That's right. It was I want to say my first salary was just under 40K or something like that coming out of college in 1985.
Wow.
Okay. In 1985. So that was just unheard of. Like my roommate, I think he was in the same program I was. His job was 21K.
What?
Right?
So you got double
what most of the people were getting. Yeah, the average was like 26K or something like that, or 23K. I got almost double what everybody else was getting. And you turn this stuff in at college, you turn it in because they want statistics, right? So you turn all the data in, you show them, and they're going, this can't be right. I said, I had all these job offers and I pitted them against each other. And I told one I wasn't going to come because of the other one. Eventually, this is the one I'm taking. They go, this is crazy. And I said, this is how it'll be done in the future, I think is what I said, which of course it was. You use what's given to you, right? But I also chose to come to Silicon Valley. And I chose that for an interesting reason. I'm still a kid, right? I'm 21, 22 years old, whatever it is. And I look at and I interviewed in various places in Orlando, in Fort Worth, Texas, and some places in the Northeast, whatever. I decided on Silicon Valley because I looked around and saw at that time at least hundreds of companies. Today it's thousands, but at least hundreds. And I said, this industry is rife with layoffs. It just tends to have ups and downs. Just tech has always done that. It's just, and by the way, it's been that way since the 60s, right? There's ups and then there's downs, and there's ups and there's downs, and then tons of layoffs, and then everybody's trying to hire. And I said, if I get laid off in Orlando from a tech company, it may be one of 3 tech companies there at the time, right? If I get laid off in Fort Worth, Texas, I have 1 or 2 choices. If I get laid off in Silicon Valley, there's hundreds of other jobs for me. It'll be fine. That's how I made the decision.
And what was the company that you ended up working at after college?
National Semiconductor.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And what was it like working there? You had a position in your comp package to be very extremely competitive. Did they treat you with a level of like seniority coming in because of how high you were paid, or was it you were just like any other graduate?
They had layoffs just before I got there. And so all the departments were emptier than they had been. But in those days, you didn't rescind offers you made to university students. You had your layoffs, but if you'd already made the offers, you hung on to those. So they didn't rescind my offer. They could have because they went through layoffs. So I show up and there's a pile of work to do that people used to do. And I'm an application engineer, and that's a very broad thing. That means you're helping customers, but you're also creating documentation. And so I just got to work, and I started to work, I don't know, I probably worked 16-hour days every day. You could not do work from home. There's no such thing. You had to be at the office. You did have a computer on your desk, and you worked. That's what you did. You sat there and generated content or interacted with customers over the phone. There's no video at the time. And I was generating huge content, big books of every single type of device. This was something called gate arrays and standard cells. They are a type of semiconductor device that you could easily arrange and fabricate, a digital device, right? And so you had to document all of the functions that could be used in this device. So I went hard into documenting everything that we could do in the different kinds of packages and such, and the speeds and the next generation that was coming. We were at 3 micron, I think we're going to 2 micron, etc. And I just did an immense amount of work. It was incredible. And it was interesting
fun
because
for you? Like,
yeah,
really?
yeah.
It sounds a little boring. But it was fun for you.
Yeah, I was learning. I was having fun. They just gave me stuff. It's wow. If you give it to Kevin, it gets done.
Yeah, and I
So
think
I'm
again,
just
like
a machine.
that speaks again to your competitive advantage. Like, to me, like, that might sound boring, but if you're having fun doing it and can do a lot of it, then that just means you're going to be able to just surpass any kind of people that are
I was a
competing for that
machine.
job. Yeah.
No, I mean, nobody, like, I was a machine. The stuff was pouring out. It was like, oh, how do you do all that? You work 16-hour days. It's my first real job in industry. I have to be really good. I did do internships at IBM, so I'd had some experience in industry, but this was just, I was just plowing it out. So interestingly enough, I have a recruiter contact me. I'd only been there maybe a year and a half. I have a recruiter contact me and says, look, there's this Japanese company, Seiko Epson, that has this big office now in San Jose, and they are really up and coming in the United States, and they want to interview because they need someone in the same department, and I'm out trying to recruit from other companies doing similar work. So I interviewed there, and I got a job offer. I'd only been at the first company for a little over a year. And the job offer was like 30% higher than what I was getting paid, because they wanted now someone with really great experience. And by then I went really deep in this particular area of custom integrated circuits, right? And so my knowledge was probably the equivalent of someone who had done it 5 years or something. I was just so deep into it. And so now I had a really good offer, way better than the first offer. And so I went to my manager, and he was just livid. But I said, I actually want to stay. But it turns out the competitive rate for me apparently is this, right? Here's the offer. That's the competitive rate. And they hemmed and hawed, and we went to the VP. I knew the VP, Fred Horn, where he sat right outside. I sat right outside his office, actually. And Fred said, went to HR and all of this, but it's a big company and they have limits. And if you're not managing people and you've only been here, they couldn't match it just because it would be too out of whack with
and
others.
it might, other people might get jealous of how much you're being paid, especially if they have like certain seniority.
That's right. They couldn't match it. And it was probably the same pay my manager was making or whatever. And so they sadly had to say, take the other things. I did a 2 weeks notice, and this is interesting. So on my last, even though I'm going to a competitor, I'm so hell-bent on finishing a huge project, which is just, I got to get this big book out, and it's got to be printed, and it's got all these colors, and it's really complicated, and there's only one color printer, and it's very complex stuff of all these different macros and things that are inside these ICs. I stayed till midnight on my final day. Everybody else had left, said goodbye to me. They didn't walk me out. I just stayed and finished the project. I left it on the vice president's desk. When I walked out, I handed my badge to security, shook his hand, and left.
Wow. Did they call you? Did they say anything about that?
No, but I'm sure they were. I saw people after that. They were just like, that's what you did on your last day? I said, yes, you paid me to finish this project, and I'm going to finish it. And if I've got to be there till midnight, I've got to be there till midnight. There was an interesting learning experience out of this, though, is that when I was at that company at the time, we were trying to make some very large sized integrated circuits. And the larger the chip, the more likelihood of defects in that chip, and you have to throw it away, right? So you get something called yield out of a wafer. And if we could yield one of these per wafer, we were feeling really good. And what I was told is that the Japanese must be dumping way under cost the chips of similar size in the United States, because they're selling them for $100 and it costs us $1,200 to make it. How can that be? So a day later, I'm at the Japanese company, and I'm going through data. I'm learning about yields there. Okay, they're yielding like 50 of these things on the same wafer instead of one. So they're not losing money at all at $100. They're printing money at $100, and we were losing money at $1,200. So it was an eye opener that what you think in one company might not actually be true in the other company. When you get there and dig in, you might learn something.
Yeah.
And their clean rooms were so clean that they could yield
And I also
amazingly
think
well.
like the more you're willing to hop between company to company, from project to project, like you're less attached to where you came from. I think the more opportunity you have to learn, and the more opportunity you have for massive opportunity.
No
And it seems
question.
like you took that. Want to speed run through Psycho and go? Is it Seiko?
Seiko Epson.
Seiko Epson. I want to speed run through Seiko Epson and go to eventually co-founding your own company and how you went about doing that. At what point did you feel ready to strike out on your own?
Great question. So I was at Seiko Epson for quite a while, and then I went to a company called High Tech, and then I was at a company called Hestia. And then while at Hestia, we were working on the very first multi-chip modules, multi-chip packages, very complex packages and plastic, so they were low cost. And this was really groundbreaking technology, and a technology I really enjoyed. It was a very small company, however. It was like 16 people. And because of that, it was the first time I was in a really small company. I got to learn everything. I got to learn finance, I got to learn marketing, and I got to do a little bit of everything. It's sales, it's marketing, it's finance person's out. I better learn how to do that work. So I was doing a lot more, and I learned so much about running a small business. And I didn't think that business was particularly well run. It wasn't, but it didn't matter. I learned a lot. I learned a lot. Like I never thought about, oh, you actually have to make payroll every 2 weeks. There has to be enough cash that came in from either customers or potentially investors to make sure you make. I never thought about that before. And those of your listeners who do startups, payroll and AP and AR, you live with that, right? You're just living with it because you're trying to spend nearly to the limit to grow your company, but at the same time, you do have to meet payroll. And if you don't, it's really bad. Like you're going to have to pay them. So the laws are pretty clear. You have to meet payroll. So I thought this was a great learning experience. And when I was there, I learned a lot of new technology and some ideas started to come to mind about, and I met customers and other people. And so with another guy, Art Kutch, who's still a great friend, Art was dabbling in ideas around wireless data, actually sending data over the air wirelessly. This was not done yet. And wide, I don't mean within an office. And there was no Wi-Fi yet. There wasn't Wi-Fi, and there was no data, and there was no cellular data. There was no such thing. Couldn't do data. You could make a call, that's it. But the device to do so was this huge big box, and it was only for commercial use, and it had a big antenna, all this. And so we had an idea to miniaturize this concept and send much more data over the analog cellular airwaves at the time.
And you had this idea while you were working at this other company. Like these ideas were
yes, but they're totally unrelated to the other company. Right?
Yeah, but because you were talking to all these customers, because you were so integrated into the issues that are coming up with this other company, you're like, wait, I can maybe solve some of these issues if I invest or uncover something like use cases with this new technology, this like air communications technology.
That's right. If I can get the thing down to the size of a cell phone,
which is not an easy task.
Business. No, it was not an easy task in that day, going from something the size of a desk.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the idea. So I formed, I and Art co-formed a company. We're co-founders.
Really
I was
quick,
CEO.
I want to dwell a little bit on that transition because I think it is the transition from the security or the seeming security of being employed by someone who's handling like the weight of making payroll every 2 weeks or the weight of making sure you have enough customers or all of that kind of stuff to striking out your own. I feel like there's an emotional blocker for a lot of people in making that kind of leap. And you're not someone that has that emotional blocker generally, because so far you've been able to jump from company to company pretty easily and create your own opportunities. But maybe like speaking either through your co-founder's eyes or a little bit of your own experience, you have an idea that you think can work. But is that really all it was? Just having an idea and then you're like, all right, I'm quitting?
Yeah.
If you could, I would love for you to walk me through a little bit more of what it actually took to say, I'm going to quit my stable job to pursue something with high upside, but massive instability.
So the first thing is, this was something that would take millions of dollars to create. So it wasn't just an MVP software piece that you could do, right? It included hardware. You had hardware, firmware, software. And so you had to form a company and get it funded before you could do anything, because there was no MVP. That was not possible. So we formed a company, and then started to meet people who could help us raise money. So people who were connected to other people.
And
right?
how do you already quit your job at that point?
No,
Okay.
I'm still working.
Okay.
And I'm still working the other one. And I'm doing this as a little side thing from my house, right? Got a little setup at the house, and we would get together on the weekends and come up with a strategy and build out the business plan, et cetera, et cetera. And then we started to go out and pitch VCs. And of course, the VC world was much smaller then. I don't know that there were a few hundred total VCs, almost all of them in Silicon Valley, and none of them had funds probably more than $100 million, right? These were small in comparison to today. And I think we pitched 50 VCs before we got a bite. And that's still not an atypical number today. You have to pitch a lot of people sometimes to get the bite.
And you already knew from sending out those 200 applications, I feel like you were
playing a numbers game.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a numbers game. In the end, someone's going to say, this is exactly what I was looking for. And someone did. And I want to say our first round was probably $5 million or so. There was no friends and family round. And then we hired a team. I had a great CTO.
So at the point where you raised, was that the point where like, okay, I have enough feedback from the market, enough confidence that I can now quit my job. So you basically, because I think a lot of people might quit their jobs before they start raising. They quit their jobs. I have an idea. I think it's really good. Let me quit my job and pursue it. But it seems like you're like, no, I'm not going to quit until I have evidence that this can actually be a thing.
The reason they do it today is you quit your job and you're going to have an MVP in a week. Like a lot of the companies are SaaS companies or other, and I can gen up something with a few guys in the garage pretty quickly, have it working, have a website out there, have some users, have feedback. I can quit my job and say, I'm now going to go full time and go raise money. But we would take 2 years before we had anything working, something like that. It was a huge project. And a lot of the projects I've worked on have been larger than life like that. And so really you couldn't do it until you had money. It would be too high of a risk. And this is generally true with hardware companies, by the way. If you're going to build a piece of hardware, it's gonna take more.
I guess to extrapolate like a lesson from that, would you say if like today you can quit your job pre-raise or pre-revenue if you believe you can get to an MVP within a month to 3 months?
Yeah, and I see MVPs in a weekend, really, because you can do that now, especially with AI helping us code.
Yeah, you have the vibe coding days now.
Vibe coding now, and in a couple hours, I've got something basically functional. It's ugly, but it works. So things have changed, right? But in those days, it wasn't that way. And so, no, you wouldn't quit your job until you had funding. And once you had funding, you quit, and then we started the company. Now, you asked a question earlier about something about how should people feel that way. And first of all, I'm not a worrier. I don't worry. I'm not naturally a worrier. But the second thing is this whole idea of entrepreneurship, right? Vulnerability. Look, if you want to be a true entrepreneur and you want to start companies, most of them will fail. Now, we don't read about those people, but statistically, most of them fail by and large. And I can give you rough statistics. If you've just started a company with your friend, but you don't have any funding yet, the chance of success is about 1 in 1,000. It's terrible. The chance of success once you get a tiny little bit of friends and family money is about 1 in 100. 1 in 100. Once you get VC money, it's 1 in 10.
Wow.
Okay. So statistically, the chance of you succeeding is almost zero once you start out here day one. But by the time you get VC money, it's about 1 in 10. And those numbers are established today. And yes, there's firms that they've done better. They're doing 3 in 10, and there's other firms. But across the industry, it's 1 in 10 after VC money, after raising 5 to 10 million. All right. So your chance of success is low. You've got to go in being vulnerable, being okay with that vulnerability, being okay potentially with shame, and being okay with failure. Not that you're trying to fail, but you have to be honest with yourself. Statistically, I'm going to fail. Statistically, it's likely to be a failure. You're going to try to succeed. You're going to try to be that unicorn, but statistically, chance of success is not high. So if you're built for that and you're going to come back again and again, and maybe it's your number 5 company that is the big success, go for it. Please do that. But if you're going to be someone that says, oh, I've only been in this a year and a half and the customers aren't buying and can't raise any money, and I suck. No, you don't suck. That particular idea didn't take off, and maybe the timing isn't right. Maybe you don't have the right team members. Maybe you're bad at raising money. I don't know. But if you love this field, do it again. Go to the next one. Go to the next one. Keep going. And if you're not built that way, just don't do this, right? Because your chance of being successful the first time is very low. Yes, the PayPal mafia was. Yes, Mark Zuckerberg was. Yes, Sam Altman is, right? I can go down the line, but we don't read about the other tens of thousands in Silicon Valley that started companies and it went nowhere. And I meet a lot of those people, and you can't get depressed about it. Just do the best you can.
Yeah, and also, like, I've interviewed people on the show that have raised $60 million for a company that failed. Like that, that happens all the time too, of getting to these massive heights where you have publicity and it looks like a success on the outside, and on the inside, it's like, all right, these numbers aren't quite working.
Look, we know, we can point to companies that spent billions and failed. WeWork is an example.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, complete failure. Maybe that model will never work. I don't know. They spent tens of billions before it went to zero. Look at some of the recent EV car companies that have failed. Tens of billions were spent before it went to zero. So don't feel bad at 60 million. Don't feel bad at 100 million. Don't feel bad at 5 million. This is the risk. This is the game. It's the risk everybody's taking. And what you need to do is have high integrity, transparency, be honest when it's not working, work with your investors and your board to make it work. Get independent board members that have experience and have been CEOs before. A lot of people don't do that today. I don't want to give up stock, and I don't. Get independent board members. They are great sounding boards that you can work with deeply, and they will have been there, and they will have failed, and they'll know about transparency, integrity. Don't lie, don't cheat. This is just high integrity, fundable every day.
And so when you entered into this, so you raised the money, you raised the $5 million for it would be Air Communications Inc., correct?
Yeah.
What do you start to do with that money? How do you kickstart things? How do you get to, again, you said this is a hardware company, so it's going to take a while for things to actually...
Hardware, firmware, software. Hardware, firmware, software, all three.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the worst of all worlds.
It's going to take a while. So what does it mean to get going on a project like that? Like, how do you think about project roadmap? How do you think about showing to investors, like, hey, this is working? How do you show to new investors, hey, this is working enough to the point where we need more investment to make sure it becomes
that is
reality?
what you do. Look, build out a quality business plan. Do it with your board. Make sure that they buy in. Make sure your team buys in. Make sure you always have to have a roadmap, because you're always selling today and the future, right? Whatever you have, it's not small enough. It's not fast enough. It's not cheap enough. So the next version continues down that road. And then you're always pitching. You're pretty much always raising money, because whatever you raised is usually good for about 12 to 18 months, maybe 24. And then you're raising again. Like, nobody raises 5 years of money. Nobody's going to give you 5 years of money. So they're giving you a 12 to 18 months of money. And in that 12 months, you have to make enough progress to go back out and say, maybe I need a new lead investor because that first investor's tapped out or whatever. And that's it's not untypical or atypical. So this is just part of the business. It's like table stakes. Table stakes is you're always raising money. You are always looking at the future, and you're changing the engines while the plane's flying.
Yeah.
And you have to have a product that works, and the dog's eating the dog food, and they have to eat it every day, and they have to eat more of it. And you got to have upsells. And this is what we do. It could be a SaaS company, obviously. And SaaS metrics are different than hardware metrics, but it's ARR, and it's recurring revenue, and it's churn, and all of those things. And look, the AI companies today most of them are seeing pretty high churn.
Yes.
They're seeing high churn because people, many reasons. One is that there's other companies coming out with changes or improvements on the technology, and people just jump. And the second reason they're seeing churn is that the products are not saving money for businesses, and they're looking, frankly, businesses are looking for headcount reduction, right? And so churn is a big problem. It's a problem in any startup. How many of these customers are going to be with us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road? Or it's not that sticky and they just leave to the next thing? All of that's a problem. So you're trying to reduce churn. You're trying to reduce costs. You're trying to improve the product. You're trying to reduce bugs in every product, every software, every SaaS. This is hard. Like I said, don't do it. If you don't want hard and you don't want 16-hour days, don't do this, right? Put your money into the lottery. You have a better chance.
So with Air Communications, what were some of the big roadblocks that you went up against when you were starting?
The first is that the cellular network itself wasn't meant to carry any data. And we were trying to shoehorn in data going over an analog cellular network that was never meant to do it. Surprisingly, we were able to do it, and we invented all kinds of technology that would just work across the cellular network. It wasn't digital cellular yet. Today it's digital, and of course we move data. In fact, we move probably more data than voice today. But at the time, that wasn't the case. And the second thing is product size and product cost. So our first product, the Air Communicator 1, we had software that had to work on the desktop. In fact, I wrote all the Mac software myself. I wrote all of the test and tuning regime, which was on this big HP console. It was written in some kind of extended BASIC for testing purposes. So I wrote all the tests.
Wow.
We had a great hardware team that designed the hardware. The RF team designed the RF. This is hard. I'm designing a cell phone that does data before anyone did that. And it's the first smartphone. It's not super smart. It has a small screen on it, but it sends and receives data. But most of that data, you'd have to plug the phone into your laptop and use the laptop screen, right? Because the cost of screens was so high that you couldn't burden that. And you also wanted a small device. And unlike what we have an iPhone today, a complete screen that's all touchscreen, we didn't have that technology then. That wasn't a possibility, right? This is many years before the iPhone, because it's 1992, 1993. So you're talking about 14 years before an iPhone, right? 13 years. So we ran up against every possible problem: hardware problem, software problem, firmware problem. We invented over-the-air updates. We were the first people to ever do an over-the-air update on a device, where it said, "I'm ready to update, and don't turn me off," right? And it would go and grab stuff and update itself. That was unbelievable. It's not something we patented, unfortunately. We should have, because that would have been a darn good patent. But it was a breakthrough, and people said, "What do you mean it updates itself? Don't you have to plug it in?" No, just it'll update itself. It'll go get new software when it needs it. It'll fix itself.
Wow.
And then we had to have a watchdog timer in there, which is something that says, let's see you downloaded it, but it was corrupt and it couldn't run. Well, it would throw it out, bring the old one back, have a bootloader, and start over, right? So we had to invent all of those things along the way as well, because we wanted a product that could improve itself. And that was unheard of then.
Yeah, imagine like all of in creating a project this big, you are inventing like countless things along the way that can be integrated into all kinds of electronics across the board.
It was, and it got that way. So we had the first digital phone in 1992, 1993. You could hold it in your hand. You could receive faxes.
Wow.
Because faxes were really important then. It would receive a fax, but it couldn't display the fax. So it would display it over here. We were doing early voice user interface stuff, which is where I learned a lot about voice user interface there, that I later used to invent the virtual assistant, because we wanted, if the phone had gotten an email, for example, and had emails in it, we wanted to make sure it could tell you that, but the screen was so small, could it talk to you? Could we use text to speech? So we were investigating these kinds of interfaces already. And then we had a second version, the Air Communicator 2, and it was this really quite small, heading towards an iPhone size. It was a little thicker, but it was small, and it was a flip phone, so you could still do voice, but it received data and it received emails. It could store them, and it could store fax inside it. It could store voicemail inside it, all of those things. Before that, voicemail was in the network, so we would store it inside the phone.
You're making this like revolutionary product that has all this functionality, but like you mentioned, there's some like difficulties with screen, and they have to plug it in.
Limitations, yeah.
Yeah. What was the reception? Like, you build this thing, and I think the thing with something like this, and maybe this is not a worry of yours because you're not a worrier, but if I was thinking about this, I have 2 years to build this product, and then there's a moment where I go to market with this product, and that's the moment where you actually fully, truly understand, is this thing going to work? Or it works technologically, but are people going to understand it enough to want to buy it, and buy it in mass, and buy it enough to make sure all of the investors are paid back, and we're paid back, and we can do another phone, all that kind of stuff. So what does launch look like?
Yeah, so we partnered with the cellular carriers, and there were many cellular carriers then, from AT&T to Meritech. There were all these regional cellular carriers. There were hundreds of them. We partnered with the largest ones, and they sold it on our behalf, and we private labeled them, the Meritech data phone, things like that. And so we sold it with the cellular carriers, who then sold it to their what we call road warriors at the time. These were salespeople and others who really needed access to their data wherever they were, right? They could not wait till they got back to a hotel room. And in those days, you'd have a modem and it'd make all these noises and you'd get something onto your laptop. But here you could actually plug it in and your email would come into your laptop wherever you were, in an airport, anywhere, right? But remember, there's no Wi-Fi yet, right? This is the only communications you have. They could be in a car, they could be on the road. So it sold to road warriors in the thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands, but in the thousands. It also sold to the FBI because they would slap it under a vehicle. It had its own battery, and that battery would last days. They'd slap it under a vehicle with a little tracker, and that tracker, we had a serial port on it. So you basically, there was an API to it. So you could make it send data from something else, right? So you could slap it under a vehicle with a little GPS module, and every minute it would call and send the data into the FBI computer. And so they could track you in your car wherever you were going using an air communicator. There was no other way to do it. Right?
Was that something that you had thought this could be used for when you started out?
But it was one of the biggest applications was law enforcement, slapping it in a vehicle and tracking the vehicle.
The one of the biggest use cases was something that you had no idea would be possible.
No idea.
Wow.
And of course, we never thought about tracking a vehicle. Why would, and there was no other technology to track vehicles then.
Yeah.
This was it. You got an air communicator. And then we went to schools. So schools that wanted access to the internet. And then the PBS and the CTIA, Cellular Telephone Industry Association, sponsored with the US government this ability for classrooms to get online. There's no internet wired in any school in America at that time. There's nothing. They don't even have phone lines in the classroom, so there's no modems. There's nothing. There's no internet in a classroom. But the teachers want to teach using resources that are online. So what happens? We have this huge thing that all the schools start getting air communicators, because as long as there's cellular service, you could get data into the classroom. It's slow, but it comes in.
Wow.
And so you could teach from online coursework or search for things or whatever, right? Yahoo at the time. There wasn't a Google yet. So there was it was called a PBS Internet in the Classroom or something like that. And thousands of these things went into classrooms. It was the only possible way you could get internet.
So,
remember, no Wi-Fi, no modems in a classroom. That's all there was.
So it seems like the initial use case that you had prepared for of these road warriors that would have access to their data at any point was like almost, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it feels like more of a footnote to the FBI and classroom use cases.
Yeah, it's true. So those were all good use cases, but here was the problem. This device was over $1,000.
Wow.
And in those days, people would get a simple Motorola flip phone for, I don't know, it was $200 or $180 or something like that, right? So this was very for specialized use cases. And the specialized use cases, like I said, were thousands, but not hundreds of thousands. And so what ended up happening is we were able to build a continuing business, but not a large and growing business. And so eventually your investors get tired. It's making money, so they don't want to shut it down, but it's not making enough money to keep the entire R&D team there. So what you do is you cut it back to a skeleton crew. You keep making product. You keep shipping product. You keep repairing product and all of the things you got to do and supporting product. And then you eventually sell the technology to someone who's going to do something else with it, right? The patents, and it's which is what we ended up doing. So
how did that feel? Because it's like you have these grandiose visions of, all right, you pitched investors probably on the $1 billion company, the next $1 billion company.
There was no such thing as a $1 billion company then.
Or
if you pitched them on a $50 million company that in those days would be valued at 2 or 3 or 4x revenue, and that'd be a big number. A company that exited at 100 million was almost unheard of. $1 billion was unheard of. That was Google only.
Okay, so then 50 million or whatever the unicorn, quote unquote, at the time was. And what was it like for you, or how did you think about the success of the company, what you wanted to do next in the wake of, again, still a success, like you ended up selling the company, right?
Yeah.
So it's still a success, but I'm curious, I guess, like how you thought about it and what are the lessons that you took away from, like, I guess, this company?
I was proud that we not only tried hard, we succeeded in bringing 2 products to market, and they worked. And they continued to work for years afterwards. These were good products that did exactly what they were supposed to do. And we had a team of upwards of 100 people that worked on this product, on these products. And super proud of the team. Unlike a lot of companies, dogs were eating the dog food, just not that many. And so at some point you have to give up the ghost and say, this isn't yet ready to be a big business because the technology isn't small enough and it's not inexpensive enough. And there's not enough of a screen on the device itself to do enough. And you just go down the line. But no, I think I didn't feel sad. One thing is our investors, first of all, I was friends with my investors. Second of all, they were not happy that they didn't have a success, but they had already planned on 1 out of 10. So we weren't the 1 out of 10. But the second thing is that they never felt at any time it wasn't a high integrity company, right?
Which is, again, that's that's what builds a reputation in Silicon Valley that you can eventually have a win with. If you build 10 companies, one of your 10 is going to win.
Right.
And as long as you keep integrity over all of those 10 tries, you're going to be you're an eventuality away from success.
There was an interesting thing that happened in the middle. Some of the investors started arguing with the investors across the table at shouting matches. And so the lead investor decides on his own to essentially close the company and brings in a closer. And so I come into the office one day and there's someone in my office. And I said, what are you doing here? And he says, hi, I'm Jim, or whatever it was. I've been brought in to shut down the company. I said, why would you do that? We have money in the bank. The lead investor made the following decision, right? And so I went out and raised more money and fired him and threw the other guy off the board and just changed up the board. And then we continued on. So then anyway, I'll get to the last part because you'll appreciate these stories, right? That's a true story. So I fired him because I was back in charge. Get out. I'm not paying you anymore.
Yeah.
And we needed very little money to continue. And we continued to sell product. It wasn't that we weren't selling product. Then the second thing, a couple of years later, we brought in collectively a CEO so I could just focus on the technology, which I love much more than being a CEO. I really do. CEO is managing people and problems. Working on the technology is a lot of fun. So I don't need to be the founder that has to be the CEO. In fact, I'd rather not be. I'd really rather put a professional there. I'm a good CEO. I am. But there's better CEOs than me. They should do it. So we've got this guy in, and he's been CEO for 9 months, and his job one was to raise money. He hadn't raised any money, hadn't raised a dime. I don't think anyone was going to give him any money. So I went out and got $1 million commitment that would take us like another year because we really weren't burning that much money a month, 50 or 60K or something like that. He is so mad that I raised the money. He fires me from my own company.
Can you do that?
Sure. He's the CEO, of course. Of course he can. And at this point, it's all right. If you guys don't want the money, that I've got the money on the table here, then the heck with you all, right? Then I'm done with you. So the board turns around, fires him for firing me. I am still on the board, but I think I resigned from the board at that point. We put our VP of manufacturing, VP of ops in charge of the company.
Was that
trimmed down the company?
Was that not like I feel like you're saying is very matter of factly, but was it not like a little emotionally tumultuous to be fired from your own company?
It was that day, but it happens in Silicon Valley every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Well, how did you feel that day? Because that is as much as you can be like by the book and critically think and try to separate the business from the emotion, like that is still an extremely difficult thing to have to move through.
Again, if you are founding a company, there's a very good chance you will be walked out of that company statistically one day.
What are the statistics on that?
Bad. Yeah, one way or the other. You're either going to run out of money, so you're still leaving the company, or they're going to put someone will put professional management in, of which you may or may not be. And most founders want to be the CEO and they want to run the show. I think the best founders are happy to take any role in the company, including leaving, including just on the board. I love being on the board. That's my favorite role, right? And in fact, I love to start things, move to the board, and hire professionals to run it. I love that. That is my favorite role. But yeah, it felt really bad at the time. Within a day or two, I said, I guess I'm done with this. I will help the company with a transition to a much smaller set that won't lose any money. And then that company lasted a few years before it sold as a very small, trimmed down company that kept selling product because there were buyers of the product. But we fired that CEO 3 days later collectively because I was on the board. So we just fired him for firing me, which he really shouldn't have done. Nevertheless, everybody's friends, and all that all worked out.
And eventually you did have to sell, shut down, and would go on to your next thing. Did you have a plan of what you wanted to do next in the process selling this company?
No, but long before we sold it, I went on to General Magic, and that was a great move. It was a public company. I did very well. I took the stock from 93 cents to about $20, $19. The stock went up 20x. The stock went up 20x while I was there. I was EVP of products, and I invented the virtual assistant there with a team of 100 people. And it was the first virtual assistant in the world that ultimately that technology got licensed for Siri at Apple and for Alexa at Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the core. We had a dozen patents or so. That's the core technology to build virtual assistants.
So how did it feel like going from, maybe this wasn't a difficult transition for you, but from what I've heard, going from founder, the person in charge, and more just having autonomy to make your own decisions and what you think is best for the company, to being at a larger company where you have a boss or a couple bosses, how did that transition feel? Was there anything in you that felt like, all right, obviously a huge opportunity to join something like this, and you did amazing work there, but was any part of you reluctant to give up the kind of autonomy you had when you were founding your own company?
No, because I liked the CEO. I had quite a bit of autonomy as EVP of products and services. So we're going to build a service, we're going to build products, and they were mine to build. Obviously, I had to convince the CEO that what we were coming up with, I had product management, what we're coming up with was correct and had a market opportunity. but we worked really well together. And so I think if you look, it's important to be a good leader. It's also important to be a good follower. Because no matter what you do and no matter what company you think you're running or you are running, you do have a boss. And that could be the board, it could be the chairman of the board, it could be your investors, it could be your husband or wife, right? But there are other people in your life that you report to. And you better do that equally. Great leaders are great followers first, because they understand what it is to follow it, and they understand what it is to say yes.
And also, there's a lot of listening to your employees. Like a good leader needs to make their employees happy so that they can continue to lead them and they all don't leave. So there's an ear to the ground always.
That is exactly right. Yeah. So listening skills are critical. And so I loved working for someone. I have no problem working for someone else, actually. I don't need to be the leader. If my ideas and patents and direction and invention are good and interesting, then I should be able to sell it to them, right? If Siri's a mess right now at Apple and they've restructured again. I knew the guy who was running it, and Tim pulled him out. And I was joking with someone. I said, they actually just need to have me go fix it because I know exactly what to do. I invented the dumb thing, right? I've been waiting for this day when we can make Siri correct and do what it should be doing for you.
Can you tell me a little bit about what inventing it took? And like, how did you stumble upon or create this idea that it's been revolutionary across so many industries?
$100 million is what it took, and a big team and a vision and some things that to this day are how we do things. So the idea here was that there was a problem, and the problem I knew from air communications, which was people are out there on the road and they need access to information that they don't otherwise have access to, especially when they're driving. And so the problem set was, when I'm driving, if I had a flip phone and that's all I had, there's nothing I can do. I just drive, right? I can't call in. If I have a real assistant, I can call him or her and say, did I get any important emails, if I've allowed them to be on my email? And this was the advent of the internet too. So you're talking 1995, World Wide Web shows up.
Yeah.
Right. So this is 96, 97, 98. And by that time, everybody has some kind of email address. Everyone's got a calendar that was online, right? You can get to it in some way. And so now you have a real problem. And the problem is I'm driving, and when I'm driving or doing something else, I don't have a screen I can look at. I don't yet have a smartphone in the way that we look at the iPhone today. So when I'm driving, I have a problem. So the idea was, if I could call a service and she, Portico Mary was her name, could read me my email, by the way, could answer my phone for me, could take messages, could put people on my calendar, like a Calendly, which we do. So we did all that, and could read me my stock quotes, could tell me my next meetings, could tell me where I need to be. So that's what we built. We built the first true virtual assistant to solve the problem of I'm driving and I do not have access to this information. And you don't have an iPhone until around 2007. You don't have an iPhone until 2007. So this is 10 years before the iPhone. And that's how we solved the problem. So we invented the virtual assistant, and she could understand millions of things you'd say, and she could say essentially millions of things back.
Wow.
And
that must have been an engineering. That's an engineering feat at that time. I mean, like, I feel that's
engineering feat.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first thing we had to do was get the recognition rates up. And in those days, we were using AI, a type of AI called a hidden Markov model. And a hidden Markov model allowed us to model and learn from people's speech. But some of what was being said, we couldn't really understand. We couldn't anticipate they were going to say that. So we invented the idea of hiring linguists that would listen to what you said, specifically the things that didn't get recognized, and then would hard code them into the recognizer to say, because people would say, give me my email now. Wow, I don't know what to do with that phrase. I hear email in it. What does that mean? And so we want to bring up the email console, basically, right? Audio console. And that's what we do. The other thing we did is we kept people in domains, just the way Siri has done most of its life. If you keep people within a domain, my recognition rates go way up. So if I know we're in the email domain and everything you're talking about, next message, do this, do that, read that back, reply, I know it has to do something with email. And you're not leaving that email domain until you tell me, I'd like to jump to voicemail. I'd like to jump to calendar. I want to jump to stocks. I want you to read this website. So only a few keywords would take you back out of that domain and into a new domain. And I would keep you in that domain. And some of the patents were about that. And you could look at the architecture of Siri and go, they just copied what was in our patents. Exactly copied what was in our patents, which they did. And that's why you have a patent. And eventually Apple had to pay a lot of money to license all those patents. The other thing we invented was the idea of taking vectors. So we have things called vector databases in AI, and words, whether they're spoken or not spoken, we turn those into math representation called a vector, right? So we would vectorize, if you could, we would vectorize at the phone for certain of our devices when it was device-based, and we would send the vectors to the network. And the network would finish the recognition and send vectors back, and we would convert those back to words. That's what we would do. So we patented that. When you have seen over the last 20 years, Siri go, hang on a second, or Siri go, I'm not connected to the network, I can't answer this. That's what Siri was doing. Siri in the phone would vectorize it, send the vectors, get the vectors back, turn it back into speech. We invented that, right? We invented so many concepts around how you create a human-like interaction with Mary and what people would say. I want to marry you. I love you. How do you respond to that so that it's a reasonable response? It's a randomized response. So we built we patented the idea of a randomized response from voice. Nobody had ever done it before. Whoever thought that would be needed, but it was needed.
And so this is, again, engineering feat, takes a while to do. But I'm curious about when you released the Air Communicator and the Air Communicator 2, this was a market size of a couple thousand, maybe, or maybe hundreds of thousands max. But this might even have a market size of millions.
We had millions on the system within a few months. Millions.
Can you tell me what launch was like for this product and what growth looked like? Because I imagine it was a completely different experience than the Air Communicator.
It was. You can go online and see me launching the product on stage when I'm awfully young, and I'm talking to the darn thing on stage. What's interesting is, in order to get millions of people, what we did was we partnered with we partnered with carriers like Quest, and there was the Quest virtual assistant, there was the Bell South virtual assistant, and then there was Excite virtual assistant and the Yahoo virtual assistant. So we went and partnered with internet companies and carriers to put this to private label the service, because to go out and advertise, we did advertise it ourselves and you could buy it from us. But if you could do it there, they had access to millions of people, right? So Excite in 1 week put 3 million people on the system, right? It was just boom. Now we were getting
so you tapped into these like existing customer bases.
Yes. And now we would get, for those deals, we wouldn't get $99 a month. We'd get pennies. It was just pennies. It was based on usage, etc. But we were operating the system at a very low cost. So here's the engineering feed, actually. You go, hey, you just put that in the cloud. There's no cloud. There is no cloud. There's no cloud to go leverage. We had to build an operations center completely from scratch. And the cost of servers was so high, we said, can't do that. We built our own servers. So we built our own servers, essentially Blade servers, that would go in. We literally populated them the way we wanted to. We put them in. You would have 10 go to a single monitor. You can, I think there are pictures of me online and stuff in that server center. And we built a huge server center in Sunnyvale that had phone lines coming in and data lines. You had fiber, but you had phone also. And you had all of this phone interchange, because we had to listen to stuff in an analog world and convert it to digital on the spot. So we could take thousands and thousands of phone calls in at the same time and do all of this conversion. So we had to build the hardware, build an ops center, do all the software, make it interact with things like Outlook, and it all had to work. And we made it work, and it worked beautifully. And our vision for where we'd be within 10 years, had we kept building that system, was where we think Siri will finally get to in another little while, maybe another year, which is a true virtual assistant, a true person-like, human-like assistant that has access to all your information and can comment on it. And really, and by the way, General Magic also invented agents, literally the inventor of agents, software agents. And so we had combined this concept with our agent software and said, you could ask her to go check on tickets for the following. You could ask her to call and make a hair appointment for you.
I mean, this is 1997. Kind of what Chat GPT is doing now with their agent software. It's
That's right.
It's like coming.
We were doing that
like so early. So with all of this excitement and reach, what was the company doing right before you left?
So I left at the height of the stock. I left after 3.5 years. My job was done. I felt it was a great time to get out. After that, the company hung around for a handful of more years, 3, 4, 5 years. But it switched its business model to offer this through businesses as some kind of business network. And then there was some downturn in the economy, and then the subscriptions went down, and then they weren't getting enough, and a whole bunch of things happened. So the company, long after I left, ends up in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and eventually Chapter 7. But during that, Nathan Myhrvold, who was the former CTO of Microsoft and a friend, I knew him, had formed a company called Intellectual Ventures that was simply buying patents out of court. So he goes to court and offers something like $2 million for this slew of patents. Unbelievable set of patents, right? Unbelievable set. That he knows everyone's going to want to do voice user interface and virtual assistants in the future. He just wants to own all the patents. And he knows that because of me, because we went to dinner and we talked about it. And I said, here's all the patents. So he waits till they're available for peanuts, picks them up for peanuts, turns right around, shows up at Apple's door and says, let's start at 180 million for this year. And ultimately got billions for those patents. Billions.
Wow.
It's the story you didn't know. And look, the people who did Siri, who we know, there's a long story here. So we were partnering with Netscape at the time, and there was a team of people at Netscape that were going to build the Netscape virtual assistant and work with us. And then they flew to the wind and they went off and did other virtual assistants. I won't go through all the names because I don't want people to look up all the people, but and it modeled after what we did. They go, General Magic has a good idea here. We'll just go do this. And there's a thing in Silicon Valley, you just don't go and sue the startups. They have no money. But including the Siri team came out of those meetings, right? And some of those people came out, literally out of the Netscape stuff. So Siri built a great product and they deserve all the credit. I don't want to take any credit away from them, but it's an absolute copy of all the stuff we had patented. And again, that's what patents are for. They are there to learn from. And nobody ever came around to sue them. So they had this nice, tiny little business, but basically it wasn't anything until Apple bought it. And Apple puts it on the iPhone. Once they do, that's when Nathan shows up and says, hi. they never paid any patent fees at Siri, and they had no money to do, but Apple does, and Amazon does with Alexa, and Google does with the Google Assistant.
Wow.
So that's when all of those patents came to roost, is when the big companies finally woke up and said virtual assistants are a thing. And Nathan says they are, and I own all the patents. And he really had all the patents. And my name's the top inventor on all of them, just by chance. Right place, right time.
Wow. What a great purchase on his end. He was really thinking. Did you ever think about purchasing some of your own patents? Would that have been possible?
Sure, it would have been possible. And in hindsight, brilliant. I should have purchased all those patents for 1.8 million and turned them into 1.8 billion, right? Yeah, hindsight's 2020. What happens is you tend to just move on and go to the next thing and go invent somewhere else. And remember, whenever you're inventing at a company, even if it's your company, the company owns the patents. You don't, right? Company owns the patents. So you're doing it on their behalf. You don't get to own them again. You could buy them out of a bankruptcy court or something. You could buy them as you leave the company, but generally not. There's another fun story out of General Magic I'll tell you quickly that ties to this. We were trying to do a deal to license some of these patents to Microsoft, non-exclusively, but to Microsoft. And it was a slew of patents, including agent patents, including telescript patents, and including the voice user interface patents. And so we really wanted to have a partnership where we had access to some of their technology to integrate with, and the quid pro quo was they would license these patents. And so our legal team had worked, and some other members had worked hard with Microsoft at the time and didn't get anywhere. So I'm at a conference, executive conference, and I know Bill Gates from other conferences. And Bill is talking to Eric Schmidt. Now, Eric at the time was not yet president of Google. He was CEO of Novell, a company in Utah. And they were just having a conversation. So I walk up to Bill and I said, and I knew Eric, I said, "Excuse me, Eric, Bill, we've been trying to do this license with you at General Magic." He looks at me with this anger. He says, "We've been trying to do this with you for the last 2 years, and your team is impossible. This is great." Bill's a hard ass, right? And he basically, "This is impossible. Basically, get out of my face. We're never doing a license with you." So I walk away a little sad.
Dejected.
But I was only dejected for about 12 seconds. And I go, "No, not taking that. Not taking no for an answer." I turn around and said, "Excuse me, this is a true story. Bill, we are going to do a license, and I'm going to lead it. You don't have to talk to the rest of the people anymore. I will lead it, and we're getting it done." He says, "Oh, okay then, fine. Talk to this person on Monday morning," who I knew also, "and he'll have you up. And if you lead the negotiation and we get it done, great. I'm all for it. I'm behind it. I want to do it. I love this stuff that you've worked on. Let's go." So I talked to this guy on Monday morning, who we're still friends, and he says, "All right, come on up on a couple days later. You're gonna talk to this Karen person, right?" So I come up, I fly up to Redmond. I go in, I meet with him, and he says, "Look, I'm going to have Karen come down. She's going to be in charge of this." So Karen comes down and says, "Who the hell are you?" I said, "I'm Kevin from General Magic." I was expecting Kevin from Microsoft, right? Some other Kevin.
Yeah.
I said, "No, I'm Kevin from General. We're gonna do this deal. And who are you?" He says, "I'm not doing a deal with you." She says, "I'm not going to do a deal. We've tried the whole thing." I said, "Bill wants to do it. Your boss wants to do it. I want to do it. And not only that, not only were we going to do a deal, we're going to end this being best friends." She said, "You're crazy." We did the deal, and to this day, we're best friends. We did the deal. Now, the moral of this story comes right around one more time. A year or two later, I'm talking to Bill. Actually, Bill's at a table, and I come up and we just say hi. And he says, "Oh, Kevin, I got to tell you the outcome of all those patents you licensed to us, specifically the telescript language ones." I said, "Yeah, what was it?" He says, "You remember when you heard that I went to Sun, and all of a sudden Sun is making servers that run Microsoft operating systems?" "Yeah." He says, "It turns out all those telescript patents predate Java, and they really mimic what Java does. And so Java is infringing on all the telescript patents that we now have."
Wow.
A lot. And so I went to Sun and said, "Either you owe me billions of dollars, or we can cut some other deal." And that's how that deal got done. And that was a big deal in the industry at the time. It turns out Bill not only knew, was excited about it, was involved in it, and it all came because I said, "We're going to get a deal done." And I realized that sometimes when you do deals with bigger companies, you have to know they hold all the cards. because we think, oh, I'm this startup. I hold it. They want what I have. No, they'll just crush you. So shut up. You don't hold any cards. They hold all the cards. So you're going to have to give a little more than you'd like to get the deal done. But our stock went from 93 cents to over $5
Wow.
in a day because of the Microsoft deal, and then climbed to almost 20.
Wow.
And that's because Microsoft put us back on the map. We've been a forgotten public company.
Wow. That there's a lot in that story. There's a lot in that story. But wow, it seems again like you've been able to leverage every position that you've been in, not only for your own benefit, but for the benefit of all these companies that you've been working for. I see like why you were a star employee and an amazing founder. So after that, after you left General Magic, I want to go to Sirius Energy and eventually Appvance. But maybe we can speed run towards Sirius Energy and how you, because that feels like a little bit of a departure from like the tech, like I guess the things that you think about when you think of Silicon Valley, like focusing on like energy usage in buildings it feels like a departure from the things that you've worked on before. And so I'd love to speed run towards that if you could catch us up to that point.
Yeah, Sirius Energy, it was Sirius Materials. We renamed Sirius Energy. Was a company that I founded. We raised, I don't know, 160 million or so.
Wow.
We had 600 employees. We had 5 plants. I decided to see what I could do in material science. I quickly learned a lot of material science. I'm not a material scientist.
Why did you want to do that? Because again, like everything had
climate change. This is a big, serious, hairy problem. And buildings, actually the built environment is responsible for over 50% of our overall CO2. And that includes the making of cement and includes the heating, cooling, and lighting of our buildings. So you go, how can that be? I thought cars, actually passenger cars are like 9%. It's surprisingly small. Why are buildings so large? Every plant out there, every energy plant, right? Every coal plant, natural gas plant is generating electricity to run on electrical lines to a building. And we heat and cool our buildings that way. So not only is whatever's happening in the building, maybe have natural gas heaters or whatever, but it's all the electricity that came into the building. And when you look at it that way, you go, that's virtually all the electricity we generate, save charging EVs. Everything else goes into our buildings. So when you look at it, buildings are a huge problem. And I said, I think we can manage them better, and I think we can heat and cool them better, and we can insulate them better. So that's what I went to do. I invented soundproof drywall. It's used in every high-quality hotel, motel, multifamily, townhome today. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. It was a great invention. One of the things I'm most proud of. It's a $40 piece of drywall instead of a $10 piece of drywall, but it stops most sound going between rooms. That was a real problem in hotels until you had soundproof drywall. It was a real problem in townhomes until you had soundproof drywall. So invented soundproof drywall, invented high R-value windows that made huge strides in higher value windows that would be 3 or 4 times more insulative than dual pane. I got to retrofit the Empire State Building, the New York Stock Exchange.
No way.
Some 70,000 other projects. Yes, I lived in the Empire State Building for a while. Basically, we had a factory on the 5th floor there to reuse the glass, clean the glass, and build brand new windows right there. So that's what we did. And then they went public based on this energy savings. They got their money back in 3 years based on the change out of the windows that we designed, these higher value windows.
Wait, the Empire State Building got their money back in 3 years?
Yeah.
From savings,
3 years,
from their energy, from heating.
Yes. 3-year payback for lots of reasons. It was fascinating. They were also able to, instead of 3 chillers, they were able to go down to 2 chillers. You didn't need the 3rd chiller anymore. And that's a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment. Those are huge changes. And in fact, in my home in upstate New York, I still have those windows. Those windows are made from a company called Alpen HPP, and that is the successor to Sirius Energy for Windows. Then Pabco is making the soundproof drywall. It is a huge business for them. Both of those companies that spun out of ended up taking those products, continuing after Sirius Energy wrapped up, because we sold all the technologies. It's all
pausing.
People.
Pausing right here. Like you went from your creating this device, like the phone that was like the air communicator, that was a revolutionary thing that predates the smartphone era. And got it right to the point where you had thousands of customers in a profitable business, but it wasn't like a moonshot. And then you go from that to like General Magic, which was the moonshot. You predated Siri, and Siri took so many of, basically copied what you did. And the company itself did amazing work while you were there. Again, like you said, you 20x the stock price. And then we get to Sirius Energy, which revolutionized how we think about heating and cooling in buildings.
There was Perfect Commerce before that, and in between. Perfect Commerce
for sure
is a company that invented the multivariate reverse auction for the web.
Yeah. So I
got to invent something really cool there that is used every day today.
And I guess quickly saying what that's used for, just so we have a little context.
So if a multivariate reverse auction, I'm a buyer, I can put out essentially an RFQ, and then all of these bids can come in, but I won't measure them just on price. I'll measure them on their quality, on the history with the company, on how large of a company they are, on maybe where the goods are sourced, all kinds of things. And I can change, multivariate means I can change these variables to decide how I'm going to buy, because most people don't just buy on price. I say people, businesses. Price is one consideration in a variety of things. And so this allowed businesses to run essentially a reverse auction, right? So I'm not auctioning anything off. I'm auctioning my business to say, I will give you my business, but I'm going to judge you in many ways.
Yeah.
Turn in your bids across all of these ways of measuring it, right?
And that was sold to Micrographics?
No, that's another company. No, that's a Java company.
That's
Webnite. I did sell that to
Webnite.
Micrographics. Okay. That's right. That was a success. Then I did Perfect Commerce, which was sold to, it says on there probably who it was sold to. It was sold to a very large company ultimately, and very successful technology. The guy I co-invented that with, his name's Paul Milgram. He went on to win the Nobel Prize for auction theory. The freaking Nobel Prize.
Wow.
I got to work with him.
My question here is, you've had hit after hit, and maybe you don't know why, but I feel like you might. Like, what do you think are the qualities, the way you would like approach work? What do you think it is about the way that you approach your work and your career that allows for this many hits? Obviously you're smart, but it's not just your intelligence alone that contributes to this many hits, because there's plenty of people that are super smart that don't do nearly as much as you have. So I'm like, when you think about this next hit, or like this next thing you're going to do, what is the formula, the algorithm that you're running in your head, and how you're going to approach this work and how you approach your day to day that allows for this many hits?
Okay, a couple things. One, is there a real pain point with people who have money to pay you? So like, solving world hunger is interesting, except those people have no money to pay you. That's why they're hungry. I'm not trying to be facetious about it, but that's probably not one. That's one for a nonprofit or government agency, right? So go solve things to people who have money to pay you. Just solve real problems, and then don't be afraid to get very deep in a subject. Like, I became the world expert on the physics of soundproof drywalls. And soundproof drywall is built of a technology that requires acrylics to operate in a certain way, basically a constrained layer damped system. I didn't know anything about that from school. I didn't know anything about that from my prior work, but I said I can go learn. And I read everything I could over several weeks, and I go, I could apply this concept to drywall. I know it works for bridges and it works for disk drives. Could I do it on a sheet of drywall? Could I make drywall stiff enough to work this way? So I was willing to solve problems in fields that I've never been in before. I'm curious. I love to learn. And then I have the Joy Success Cycle, which is a book I'm working on that really, I think, hits home, which is every task and everything I do, I come at it from a point of joy, not a point of complaining. And I limit myself to one complaint a day, internal or external. Now, if your listeners go and add up their complaints tomorrow, internal and external, they're going to find it's over 100. I don't like the weather. I don't like this person. I don't want to do these tasks. I have to sweep the floor. Whatever it is, woe is me, because that's how humans are. But if you come at life and every task from a point of joy, you start to find more things in it that you would have ever seen if you just said, oh, no, I got to go research this thing. There you go. I get to research something, and I'm going to learn from this. I might learn how to do something. I might learn how to not do something. And so every task on my task list, and I keep a task list here, has joy next to it. It's like I find joy in every single task. So I am building up my positive quotient for the day to levels that my mind is open to see the opportunities and then to act on those opportunities. And you do see the world differently if every single point of the day it's a point of joy, not a point of complaint.
And I think that's often an undervalued habit, and something that I've thought of for my own life is, can every action be fun? Because if every action, if every action and every part of your job can be fun, you're going to be able to do it for the necessary time to have success. Because like success doesn't happen in a day or a month or even a year. It happens over decades. And if you're having fun over those decades, like, you're going to be able to have as much success as possible. It seems very similar to that. The joy
Why would
quotient.
you ever want to retire? And what would retirement, like, I don't know what retirement means for me, because
You're
I
having
love
so
my
much
keynote
fun
speaking.
doing, and you're
I'm having
so
fun.
much joy.
There's joy. I love my keynotes. I do AI keynotes and the Joy Success keynote, right? Those are the two big ones. I do 30 or 40 keynotes a year.
Awesome.
The last audience had 7,000 people or something there, right? So I love my keynotes. I love inventing, love it. I don't know what I could love more. I do love managing my teams and working with my teams. I love doing podcasts. Life is great.
Yeah, especially when you're focusing on the joy, because there's so much to be. There's like something I think about a lot is, like, there's billions of stimuli coming in at any moment in your life, and you can choose which of the ones to focus on. And the world is a terrible place is just as true as the world is a joyous place. And you just can choose which world you want to live in.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can get up every morning and say, regardless of which side you're on, I don't like what's going on in DC right now, and ruin your entire day and go, oh, I can't even get to the gym. I can't even work. It's this burden on me. Or you can say, I can only focus on the things that I can do something about, right? And the things you can do something about are your work, your family, your home life, your friendships. You can have huge impacts in your life there. And you should really put a lot of your focus there, because that maybe you only get one life. I think, I don't know, maybe there's this multiple life thing, but if it's only one, I hope you make the best of it every minute of every day.
Yeah, the locus of control and moving it internal, I think is super important. Like your area of impact, when you like try to focus on something too big, you just get anxiety. But if you can focus on things that you have power over, it's empowering.
That's right.
I want to go to today. You've been working with Appvance, being the CEO and CTO of Appvance. It was founded in 2012. I guess I want to focus on some of the things that you've been most excited about and are working on today.
Sure. So Appvance, I set out with a crazy goal, to have AI find all our bugs for us in software, basically eliminating 2.5+ million people who do manual testing or test automation today. That is a very heavy lift, and mostly it's been an R&D company. Obviously, it has a large swath of customers, but we have put all of our money behind the R&D and making huge strides in AI. And we recently released something called Genie that can read English test cases, they're written in English, and convert them to test scripts and run them. With no human in the middle of that, right? Today, there's millions of humans doing that work. We can eliminate those humans. And some people are going to get mad at me and saying, why are you trying to eliminate jobs? But the truth is, AI's job is to make companies much more productive and eliminate the toil at some of these jobs that are highly repetitive, right? Like customer support tier 1. Clearly, that's an example of things that are being eliminated worldwide. And another one is test automation and manual testing of enterprise software. You may not know this, but a typical enterprise, like a Fortune 1000 enterprise, has 5,000 to 15,000 applications that they manage. Almost all of them are internal facing. There might be 5 that face the outside world. Everything else runs their company. And those all get managed and updated on a regular basis. And so there's sometimes hundreds or thousands of people involved in the testing of those applications every week, because you have to update something or upgrade something for cybersecurity or whatever, and you have to then go do your regression testing. That's what we're solving. And we've cracked the code and we've solved it. And there's people in the industry who are pretty mad at that, but we're probably a few years ahead of anyone else. And we have a lot of patents in this space. So I'm very excited about the AI we're deploying and the Gen AI. We have multiple transformers in that product, all tuned to do very specific things. So very exciting time.
Super exciting. And again, like I feel like this seems like yet another thing that's going to revolutionize an entire industry. And it's something that you've been doing your whole career. Closing out, what advice do you think you would give to people like maybe starting their entrepreneurial journey, or maybe they started their first business and are trying to do something bigger or more impactful or more aligned with their like authentic voice? What advice would you give to newer entrepreneurs?
Like job one, again, find a real pain point that someone's willing to pay you to solve, and then make sure you have the right people to solve it. Now, I'm unusual because I am finding pain points, and then I go, how would I solve this? Eventually, I have to hire a team, right, that goes along with that vision, but I have enough of an engineering mind to solve these problems, and I can see how to solve them. But you might not. Someone else might be a business person, right? Not everybody's a software guy now or gal, right? Not everyone's an engineer. But you got to find a way to solve them that doesn't break the laws of physics. Find real pain points. Don't think you're right. Probably even within your company, it's the fifth business model that works. It's not the first. You're probably really wrong. Don't pick on things like I do. I've worked the Appvance thing. We've been working 12 or 13 years to keep advancing machine learning and AI to do this task. That is a ridiculously long time to solve a major problem, but we knew it would take a long time. We knew it was a multi-year problem. And I just felt I'm attracted to those problems because they look impossible. But we found people who wanted to fund that because if you do it, it's the future of software test. And with 120 billion of spend today in software QA, that's intriguing. So find big markets, find big opportunities, find real problems to solve, build moats. A lot of people don't do that today, and they get wiped out by the next best thing that comes around 2 weeks later. 12, 13 years of work, that's a moat. That's really hard to replicate those 2 million lines of code.
I'm sure there's a lot of patents.
That's right. There are. Yeah, that's my advice, and stay joyful every day.
Awesome. I think that's a great place to end. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or highlight that you're excited about now? I know you mentioned the book.
There's so much more to talk about, including my Broadway work, my film work, the book coming up, the Joy Success Cycle, hopefully by the end of the year. My website, kevinsurace.com, usually has updates. And I post every day on my LinkedIn. So you can check my posts out every single day. There's a post.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.